It was 6 in the morning, and a diesel engine was rumbling. Karen was marching furiously over the damp lawn in her fuzzy slippers, already on the phone to 911. My coffee was still steaming, yet I had somehow become the local pariah. I was floored by the sheer audacity of it. This woman was summoning law enforcement because I was working on my grandfather's truck within the confines of my own driveway. Karen Whitfield, the HOA president who acted as the neighborhood's self-proclaimed dictator, stood clad in her pink bathrobe, pointing at me as if I were a murderer rather than a man turning a wrench. "This noise ordinance violation ends now," she shrieked into her phone, a sound sharp enough to awaken the deceased. I rose slowly, wiping grime from my hands onto my jeans, a smile forming on my face. These pompous HOA despots were clueless about the person they were confronting. The fact she had never taken the time to investigate was that my family had owned this property for 3 decades before her prize subdivision was even built. Officer Martinez showed up 10 minutes later, looked up the property records, and his baffled expression communicated all I needed to know. Karen was on the verge of learning the distinction between HOA bylaws and true land ownership. To understand how I found myself in this predicament, let me explain. My name is Jake Morrison, and 6 months prior, I became the owner of my grandfather's old farmhouse, along with all 2.3 acres of it, situated squarely in the center of what is now known as Meadowbrook Estates. Grandpa acquired this land in 1962, when the area was just cornfields and pastures. He brought up 5 children here, my father among them, and I dedicated every childhood summer to dashing through that red barn and tending to the vegetable garden. The house carries the scent of coffee and sawdust, precisely as I recall. When developers began showing interest in 1989, Grandpa handled it shrewdly. He sold them the rights to develop their upscale subdivision, but retained our 2.3 acres. The agreement was unambiguous. The Morrison family land was to remain Morrison family land. No exceptions. At 45 and recently divorced, returning here was, frankly, the wisest choice I had made in a long time. My ex-wife had pushed me to sell the property, claiming it was hindering my opportunities. It became clear the only thing hindering me was her incessant desire for larger homes and more luxurious cars. The community that emerged around Grandpa's farm is, to put it mildly, something else. It consists of 47 uniform beige houses with identical green lawns, each looking as if it had come from an assembly line. There wasn't a single blade of grass askew, no cars parked on the street after dark, and not one indication of genuine human activity. Presiding over this beige monarchy was Karen Whitfield, who had been HOA president for 8 long years. Karen, aged 52, drives a white BMW that she details twice weekly and possesses a smile so insincere it prompts you to guard your wallet. She relocated here for the property values and high standards, which she seemingly interprets as making everyone around her as unhappy as she is. This woman has reported neighbors to code enforcement for having Christmas lights up beyond January 2nd. I am not exaggerating. For the initial months following my return, our coexistence was tranquil. I kept to my own affairs, did work on the house, and assisted my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chun, with her groceries. However, I suspect Karen was merely biding her time, waiting for an opportune moment to strike. That moment arrived 3 weeks ago, when I discovered a printed violation notice affixed to my front door, complete with professional letterhead and an official-looking seal. The grievances included unapproved vehicle repairs, excessive noise, and non-conforming landscaping, accompanied by $500 in fines, due in 30 days. While I may be a small-town diesel mechanic, I am far from foolish. The following evening found me at the county recorder's office, poring over every document connected to this property. The result of my search? Not a single signature from any Morrison family member appeared on any HOA agreement. Ever. We were grandfathered in and entirely exempt. When I declined to pay Karen's fabricated fine, she intensified her campaign. She took to the neighborhood Facebook group, lamenting how my rural lifestyle choices were depressing everyone's property values. The feedback was harsh, with people branding me selfish, thoughtless, and a poor neighbor. These were individuals I had never exchanged a word with, forming judgments based on Karen's distorted narrative. That's when I resolved to restore Grandpa's 1987 Chevy pickup. Consider it a tribute project or a form of therapy. Regardless, I was determined to revive that magnificent old truck. A 7 a.m. start time seemed entirely appropriate, well within the city's noise regulations. The sound of Karen's slippers striking the wet grass should have been my first sign of trouble, but truthfully, my attention was on cleaning the carburetor, taking in the familiar aroma of diesel fuel and fresh potential. Officer Martinez, who it turned out was a high school classmate, recognized me instantly. "Jake Morrison, I haven't laid eyes on you since graduation. How's your grandfather?" "He passed in April," I informed him. "Left me the farm." At that point, Martinez accessed the property records on his computer. His eyebrows rose in surprise as if spring-loaded. "Ma'am," he addressed Karen, "this gentleman has owned this property for decades." Karen's face cycled through a few remarkable shades. "That's not possible. This is an HOA community. He is obligated to abide by our rules." Martinez glanced at me, then shifted his gaze back to Karen. "Actually, ma'am, according to these official records, his property existed about 30 years before your HOA." The expression on Karen's face was one of pure, unadulterated fury. And at that moment, I understood this was merely the start. Karen did not handle this revelation gracefully, not in the slightest. The following morning, my phone lit up with a message from Mrs. Chun. "Emergency HOA meeting tonight." Karen's gone off the deep end. I shouldn't have been taken aback. When a person's entire sense of self is built on managing others, the realization that someone is beyond their control can cause a mental short-circuit. The meeting was scheduled for 7 in the evening at the community center, a beige structure that mirrored all the other beige houses, as diversity was seemingly against HOA regulations. I chose to go, driven partly by curiosity and partly by the assumption that Karen would be discussing me regardless. The smell of scorched coffee and industrial carpet cleaner assaulted me as I entered. Karen was positioned at the front of the room behind a folding table, sporting a navy blazer that conveyed an urgent need to speak with a manager. She had assembled a PowerPoint presentation centered on me. "Ladies and gentlemen," she started, advancing to a slide labeled, "Protecting Our Community Standards. We are confronting an unparalleled danger to our property values." On the screen were images of my property. My vegetable patch was designated unapproved agricultural activity. My work truck was labeled a commercial vehicle violation, and the barn my grandfather erected in 1963 was classified as a non-conforming structure. "This individual," she declared, pointing at me as if I were a rare contagion, "declines to adhere to fundamental community standards. His property maintenance jeopardizes everything we have strived to create here." I lifted my hand. "Karen, may I pose a question?" Her eye visibly twitched. "This is not a Q&A session." "Understood," I said. "But you are displaying photographs of my property without consent, asserting violations that are not applicable to me, and referring to me as this individual while I am seated right here. My name is Jake, for the record." A smattering of neighbors let out a chuckle. Karen's face flushed a deep crimson. She advanced to the subsequent slide, "Legal action required." The board, composed of 4 individuals who appeared to wish they were anywhere else, voted 4-1 to explore all accessible legal options. Mrs. Chun, bless her, was the sole objector. Following the meeting, I proceeded directly to the county recorder's office. Tommy Rodriguez, the evening clerk, was a high school acquaintance who was indebted to me since I had repaired his motorcycle at no cost. "Jake, what has you here so late?" "I need to clarify something about property records, Tommy. This HOA business is becoming strange." Tommy displayed the 1995 subdivision plat map on his screen. The information was unmistakable. Parcel A, not subject to covenants. My 2.3 acres were specifically exempted from all HOA jurisdiction, but the details grew more compelling. Tommy then showed me the HOA's original 1995 incorporation documents. Their own founding charter stated they held no authority over my land. Karen had either neglected to review the legal papers or had been intentionally disregarding them for years. "Tommy," I remarked, examining the screen, "if they have been functioning under a false premise, what does that imply for their other dealings?" "Well," he responded, navigating through additional records, "if they've been levying fees or making rulings about property they don't have authority over." That is when we discovered it. The HOA's 2019 annual report declared the total area under their governance as 17.3 acres, yet the legal filings confirmed their authority extended to only 15 acres. They had been incorporating my property into their figures, which meant they were billing residents for maintenance on land they had no authority to oversee. The next day ushered in a new phase of escalation. Karen had arranged a door-to-door petition drive, armed with a clipboard and official-looking badges. The petition called for my eviction as a non-compliant resident. From my kitchen window, I observed her canvassing the street, approaching each house with the effectiveness of an experienced politician. The sound of autumn leaves crunching beneath her practical footwear provided a constant beat as she moved from one door to the next. By midday, unsigned letters began to show up in mailboxes throughout the area, not only mine, but everyone's. "Sell and leave, or we'll make you," was written in block letters on standard copy paper. Mrs. Chun came to my door that evening, holding one of the letters. "Jake, this is becoming perilous. Karen is telling people you intend to establish some kind of automotive repair shop here." "That's preposterous, Mrs. Chun. I do some engine work in my barn, but it's not a commercial operation." "I am aware of that. You repaired my lawnmower last month and refused to accept any payment. But Karen has persuaded some people that you'll have 18-wheelers passing through at all hours." It was at this point that I chose to get serious about gathering evidence. I set up security cameras around the property's edge and began taking pictures of the precise boundaries using Grandpa's original survey markers. The metallic sound of the camera shutter became my nightly soundtrack. The most significant discovery, however, emerged when I delved further into the HOA's financial documents. Public records revealed something unsettling. They had been paying property taxes on 17.3 acres, not 15. They had been factoring my land into their tax bills and then transferring those expenses to the residents. Karen wasn't just obsessed with power. She might have been stealing money. Karen's subsequent action was an act of pure desperation masked as authority. On a Tuesday at 6 a.m., I was awakened by the noise of official vehicles in my driveway. Peering through the window, I spotted a city code enforcement truck and Karen's white BMW positioned side by side, like some sort of bureaucratic alliance. The odor of diesel fumes mingled with Karen's potent perfume. When I opened the front door, Dave Patterson, a city inspector, was standing there, looking as enthusiastic as someone about to undergo a root canal. Karen hovered behind him like a vulture in a pantsuit. "Mr. Morrison, I'm here in response to complaints about unpermitted structures and potential septic system violations." I offered them coffee, but Karen cut in right away. "That barn is obviously unpermitted, and I have cause to believe he is operating an illegal auto repair business." Dave consulted his clipboard, glanced at Karen, and then turned back to me. "Sir, do you possess permits for that barn?" "From 1963, I replied, retrieving Grandpa's old file folder. "Would you care to see them?" The look on Karen's face was beyond words, as if she had just been informed that Santa Claus was declaring bankruptcy. Dave inspected the yellowed papers with the diligence of an archaeologist. "These are grandfathered permits. The structure was built about 40 years before the current zoning laws." He addressed Karen. "Ma'am, this is all entirely legal." But Karen was not finished. "What about the septic system? I'm certain it's not compliant with the code." 20 minutes later, after Dave had inspected my perfectly operational septic system, he turned to Karen with thinly veiled annoyance. "Ma'am, everything here is in compliance with regulations. I was provided with false information." After their departure, I contacted Sarah Kim, the property lawyer Mrs. Chun had suggested. Sarah's office exuded an air of leather-bound legal texts and resolve, which I found surprisingly reassuring. "Jake," she stated after examining my documents, "you are not merely exempt from HOA jurisdiction. They may have engaged in insurance fraud." Sarah had uncovered the following. The HOA had been including my property in their insurance policy and charging residents premiums for land they had no legal authority to represent. It's a key legal point that when HOAs factor non-member property into their insurance figures, they are essentially acquiring funds through deceptive means. The takeaway is that if your property was established before the restrictions, you are typically safeguarded, and they cannot bill you for coverage you did not consent to. While I was acquainting myself with my legal safeguards, Karen was intensifying her public relations campaign. She had established a fictitious Nextdoor profile, concerned Meadowbrook resident 47, to publish daily grievances about my deteriorating property maintenance and questionable vehicle activities. The woman had also arranged what she termed an emergency community meeting at the public library. She had even reached out to Channel 7 News, asserting a property value crisis was menacing the entire neighborhood. I chose to be present at her little spectacle. The library's meeting room was filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and a palpable sense of unease. Approximately 30 residents had appeared, along with Maria Santos from Channel 7. Karen was at the front with yet another PowerPoint presentation, this one titled, "Protecting Our Investment." The smell of industrial coffee blended with the room's tension as Karen advanced through slides featuring deceptive photographs. My work truck was presented as proof of commercial operations, my vegetable patch as agricultural zoning infractions. She then displayed a picture of my barn with the heading "Potential Environmental Hazard." It was at this moment that I rose. "Karen, may I inquire where you obtained that photograph?" She nervously handled her presentation clicker. These are structures visible to the public, correct?" "Yes, but that image was captured from within my barn, which implies you trespassed on my property to take it." The room fell into a profound silence. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to cease their buzzing. I produced my folder of county records. "Since we are all gathered here, perhaps it's time for everyone to understand the true legal circumstances." Maria Santos immediately became more attentive, detecting a more significant story. I detailed the property lines, the grandfathered rights, and the HOA's absence of jurisdiction over my land. I presented the incorporation papers that explicitly excluded my property. I maintained a calm and objective tone, while Karen's expression shifted through several remarkable hues. "Furthermore," I went on, "I have found that the HOA has been billing all of you for maintenance on my property, which they have no authority to oversee." That's when the real commotion began. Residents started posing sharp questions about the actual destination of their HOA fees. Karen stumbled through evasive responses as Maria Santos took notes with great speed. 3 residents came up to me after the meeting, expressing regret for signing Karen's petition. "We were completely unaware of the legal facts," said Bob Henderson from Maple Street. "Karen made it seem like you were some sort of illegal occupant." However, the most compelling exchange was with Maria Santos. "Jake, I suspect there is a far larger story here. Would you be open to speaking on the record about HOA overreach?" As I was driving back, I saw Karen's BMW trailing me from a distance. When I turned into my driveway, she drove by slowly, speaking animatedly on her phone. The following day brought a fresh escalation. A formal police report alleging that I had made threats against her during the library meeting. Karen was becoming frantic, and frantic people take dangerous actions. Karen's complaint of threats arrived on Detective Williams' desk on a Thursday morning. By that afternoon, he was seated in my kitchen, sipping coffee and looking faintly amused. "Jake, I've looked at the security footage from the library. Unless calmly reading legal documents out loud now constitutes threatening behavior, I suspect Miss Whitfield might be wasting my time." Detective Williams was a precise man who carried a faint scent of cigarettes and doubt. He had handled neighborhood conflicts for 15 years, and aspects of Karen's account didn't seem right. "She alleges you've been bothering her, trailing her, and making menacing phone calls. But her phone history shows no calls from your number, and your work records place you at the garage during most of the supposed incidents." It was at this point that matters took an interesting turn. While Detective Williams was disproving Karen's allegations, my security cameras were recording something far more incriminating. Karen herself, moving stealthily around my property at 2 in the morning. The video was perfectly clear. On Tuesday night, Karen's white BMW was parked 3 houses away. Her silhouette was easily identifiable, even in dark attire, as she moved through the shadows to take pictures of my vehicles and look into the barn windows. The sound of gravel crunching under her shoes was audible on the audio recording. "Detective," I said, displaying the footage on my laptop, "I believe Karen is projecting. She's accusing me of stalking while she is, in fact, stalking me." Williams leaned back, examining the screen. "Jake, this constitutes harassment and trespassing. Do you wish to file charges?" Before I could reply, my phone rang. It was Sarah Kim, my lawyer, with information that altered the entire situation. "Jake, you should sit down. The private investigator Karen employed just contacted me. Apparently, Karen had invested $3,000 to hire Rick Donovan, a PI from Columbus, to dig up dirt on me. Rick had dedicated 2 weeks to examining my history, my finances, my employment record, and my divorce papers. He had even reached out to my ex-wife, hoping she would offer material for a character attack. However, the beautiful irony was this. Rick's inquiry had revealed nothing at all questionable about me. I had a clean driving history, no criminal record, a stellar work reputation, and a divorce that was settled amicably without any accusations of misconduct. What Rick did discover was information concerning Karen. Jake, Sarah continued. Mr. Donovan found out that Karen's real estate license has 3 unresolved ethics complaints. She has been leveraging her HOA role to direct business to herself, creating conflicts of interest. And listen to this. She's been using HOA funds for her own personal expenses. The weight of the revelation filled the air like the smell of burnt coffee. Rick Donovan, as it happened, possessed a conscience. Upon realizing he had been paid to harass an innocent individual while the actual offender was signing his paychecks, he chose to collaborate with us instead. It's a key legal point that private investigators who find out their clients are involved in criminal activities have a professional duty to safeguard innocent parties. The takeaway is that when someone hires a PI to look into you and they find nothing, that investigator may turn into your most valuable supporter. In the meantime, Karen's public campaign was backfiring in a spectacular fashion. Maria Santos from Channel 7 had launched her own inquiry into HOA financial dealings. She had found that several other residents had been sent letters from collection agencies for unpaid assessments, fees that were not legitimately authorized according to the HOA's own bylaws. The community was starting to divide. Mrs. Chun initiated a rival petition in support of my property rights, while the neighborhood Facebook group fractured into conflicting groups. Pro-Karen residents posted about property values and community standards, while pro-Jake residents shared accounts of Karen's tyrannical conduct and dubious financial management. Then, Karen made her most significant error yet. On a Saturday afternoon, I was at Henderson's Hardware buying materials to winterize the barn. The shop smelled of sawdust and motor oil, a familiar and reassuring scent. I was comparing prices on weather stripping when Karen entered the store like a woman possessed. "There he is," she yelled, pointing at me with a shaky finger. "The man who is ruining our entire neighborhood." The other patrons, about 8 in total, turned to look. Bill Henderson, the owner, glanced up from his cash register with the look of a man who had experienced too much drama in his life. Karen began a furious speech about property values, community standards, and my supposed intention to convert the neighborhood into a scrapyard. Her voice became higher and more shrill with every claim. Saliva flew from her mouth as she gestured wildly. "He threatened me. He's harassing me. He's planning to open some kind of truck stop right in our backyard." I remained there silently, holding my weather stripping, allowing her to incriminate herself with her own words. "Ma'am," Bill Henderson finally said, "I'm going to have to request that you either lower your voice or exit the store." "Don't you see?" Karen shrieked. "This man is a criminal, a danger to respectable people." It was then that young Ashley Morrison, no relation, regrettably, began recording on her smartphone. The video of Karen's complete public breakdown would garner 47,000 views by Monday morning. But the best part was that Sarah Kim had just found something in the county tax records that would resolve this entire case. The HOA had not only been mishandling funds, they had been functioning illegally for 3 years. Sarah Kim's call came at 7 a.m. on a Monday, and the enthusiasm in her voice sliced through my coffee-induced haze like a power tool. "Jake, you need to come to my office right away. What my paralegal discovered in the courthouse archives is a game changer." An hour later, I was seated opposite Sarah's desk, looking at a yellow document that seemed to have been through a war. The paper made a crackling sound as she spread it out, letting out the musty scent of old official records. "This is your grandfather's original 1989 land purchase agreement," Sarah stated, indicating a clause hidden in dense legal language. "Examine paragraph 7. I focused on the blurred typewriter print. Right of first refusal on surrounding development. Mineral rights and easements retained. Reversion clause if homeowners association becomes defunct or non-compliant." "Jake," Sarah declared, her eyes shining, "if the HOA's legal status is voided, You don't just get to disregard their regulations. You could potentially gain authority over the whole 15-acre subdivision. My coffee cup paused in midair. Say that again. Your grandfather was more astute than anyone imagined. This provision means that if the HOA ever ceases to legally exist, all development rights revert to the Morrison family. You could essentially be the owner of the entire neighborhood. As I was trying to absorb that startling news, Sarah presented another revelation. The forensic accountant had completed the review of the HOA's finances. Karen had not just misappropriated funds, she had embezzled a substantial amount of money. The total came to $127,000 over a 4-year period. The figures were shocking. Karen had established a fraudulent entity named Meadowbrook Maintenance LLC and had been invoicing the HOA for services that were never rendered. Lawn maintenance that didn't happen, repairs that were never carried out, and materials that were never purchased. The funds were deposited directly into her personal bank accounts. It's a key legal point that establishing shell companies to defraud organizations you oversee is considered aggravated theft, not merely simple embezzlement. The takeaway is to always review original property deeds, as they may hold significant rights you've inherited without being aware of them. But the situation became truly disastrous for Karen here. The HOA itself was no longer legally recognized. They haven't submitted their annual corporate filings to the state since 2022, Sarah clarified. In effect, the HOA no longer exists. Every ruling Karen has made, every fee she has levied, every threat she has made, it has all been without any legal basis. The HOA had been a phantom entity for 3 years, collecting funds and enforcing rules with no more legal authority than my local book club. So, when Karen threatened legal action against me, she was bluffing with a non-existent hand, Sarah concluded. A non-existent entity cannot initiate a lawsuit. The gravity of the situation hit me with the force of a locomotive. Not only was I not bound by HOA regulations, but those regulations technically no longer existed. Karen had been orchestrating a sophisticated deception, levying fees and exercising power she had not lawfully held since 2022. My phone vibrated with a message from Mrs. Chun. Karen's holding an emergency board meeting tonight. Claims she has a new legal approach to deal with Jake's situation. Something is not right. She appears distressed. Sarah, I asked, what will happen if it becomes public knowledge that the HOA has been functioning illegally for 3 years? Well, every fee levied since 2022 was acquired through false pretenses. Residents could demand complete reimbursement. There could be criminal proceedings for theft and fraud, and if someone chose to assert their legal position, she motioned towards Grandpa's document. You could compel the entire neighborhood to recognize that you possess their development rights. Every homeowner would, in theory, require your consent to manage their properties as per the original 1989 agreement. The irony was exquisite. Karen had dedicated months to trying to control me, oblivious to the fact that I might actually hold the legal authority to control everyone else. But with significant power comes significant responsibility, and I began to formulate a strategy that would deliver to Karen precisely what she deserved while safeguarding the innocent homeowners who had been ensnared in her deception. Sarah, I stated, I believe it's time for Karen to understand what genuine legal authority entails. That night, my kitchen table transformed into the command center for the most gratifying legal dismantling in the history of Meadowbrook Estates. The oak table was laden with legal papers, financial statements, and sufficient proof to completely discredit Karen's operations. Sarah Kim sat opposite me, her laptop screen casting a glow in the dim light. Mrs. Chun was in the chair to my right, drinking jasmine tea and providing the kind of strategic insight that comes from navigating 83 years of local disputes. Maria Santos from Channel 7 had her recording gear set up at one end of the table, while Officer Martinez, technically off-duty but deeply involved, examined the criminal evidence we had collected. The scent of coffee mingling with Mrs. Chen's tea created a strangely reassuring setting for orchestrating someone's professional ruin. All right, Sarah began, displaying her legal strategy on the screen. We will confront Karen with a 3-part approach: criminal proceedings, civil restitution, and total dissolution of the HOA. She clicked to the first slide. On the criminal front, I have already lodged complaints with the State Attorney General for corporate fraud and elder abuse. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division is showing interest because Karen's fraudulent company conducted business across state lines when she utilized HOA funds for that trip to Florida. Maria Santos glanced up from her notes. And the media aspect? That's your role, Sarah went on. We need this narrative to be made public in a manner that safeguards the innocent residents while revealing Karen's offenses. Can Channel 7 manage a week-long investigative report? Maria smiled broadly. HOA corruption narratives draw huge viewership. My news director will be thrilled with this. Officer Martinez leaned in. From a law enforcement standpoint, we must synchronize our actions. If Karen discovers the extent of this inquiry, she may attempt to escape or tamper with evidence. It's a key legal point that triple damages can be sought in fraud cases where the defendant acted with intentional malice toward vulnerable individuals, such as elderly residents. The takeaway is that documenting HOA meetings and maintaining financial records safeguards your entire community from corrupt board members. Mrs. Chin placed her teacup down with a soft clink. Jake, what about the other homeowners? A lot of them fell for Karen's falsehoods about you. They are victims as well. This is where our community engagement strategy was crucial. Mrs. Chun would spearhead a door-to-door information drive, clarifying residents' rights and showing them how to verify their HOA's legal standing with the state corporate registry. We would provide copies of the original property deeds and demonstrate to people precisely what they had been charged for versus what they had actually gotten. The objective, I clarified, is to shield everyone from future corrupt schemes while ensuring Karen is held accountable for her actions. Sarah displayed financial records on her laptop. The forensic accountant has pinpointed $340,000 in recoverable assets. Karen's Florida condominium, the BMW lease, and even her jewelry that was acquired with HOA money. We can reclaim most of the stolen funds. But here is where our strategy became particularly ingenious. Instead of merely revealing Karen's offenses, we would employ her own methods against her. Karen has been functioning on the premise that she possesses legal authority, Sarah explained. Therefore, we will call an official HOA board meeting, entirely legitimate and by the book, where she will be compelled to justify her financial stewardship. The brilliance of the plan was that Karen would be obligated to be present or lose any residual authority. We would convene the meeting at the county courthouse, extend invitations to all residents, encourage media presence, and have a court stenographer record the entire proceedings for the official record. She will be unaware of the criminal probe, Officer Martinez noted. As far as Karen knows, this is merely another local conflict she can dominate her way through. Maria Santos was nearly vibrating with excitement. This is going to be amazing television. David versus Goliath. But in this version, David holds a law degree, and Goliath has been embezzling funds. The psychological element was also vital. For months, Karen had used fear and threats to maintain control over the neighborhood. Our approach would be composed, evidence-based, and entirely open. Every document would be accessible for public examination. Every resident would be made aware of their rights. We are not aiming to ruin Karen out of a desire for revenge, I stated, surveying my improbable team. We are safeguarding this community from future exploitation. Mrs. Chun gave a nod of approval. Good neighbors create good neighborhoods, not stringent rules. Our schedule was demanding but feasible. Sarah would submit the final legal documents by Friday. Maria would launch her investigative report the subsequent Monday. The official HOA meeting was set for the following Thursday evening. We also had backup plans in place. If Karen attempted to escape, Officer Martinez had contacts with law enforcement in Florida. If she tried to tamper with evidence, we had already obtained copies of everything through legal means. If she attempted to intimidate witnesses, we had her harassment documented on numerous security cameras. The gratifying scent of justice blended with the evening breeze wafting through my kitchen windows. Outside, the neighborhood appeared serene under the glow of the streetlights. Soon, it would genuinely be serene. No more HOA intimidation, no more fraudulent charges, no more Karen. Ladies and gentlemen, I declared, lifting my coffee cup, let's go apprehend a criminal. Karen must have felt the pressure mounting, as her subsequent action was a display of sheer, destructive desperation. At 3 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, I was awakened by the sounds of diesel engines and Spanish voices just outside my bedroom. I went to the window and was met with a scene of disbelief. a landscaping team was methodically raising my vegetable garden. Under the intense light of portable flood lamps, they were tearing out my grandfather's heirloom tomato plants, crushing the herb garden, and pulling up fruit trees by their roots. And there stood Karen, next to a rented pickup, orchestrating the demolition like a suburban tyrant. I grabbed my phone, started recording, and simultaneously dialed 911. The security cameras were capturing everything, but I wanted additional footage. The smell of diesel fumes blended with the scent of crushed basil and shattered hopes. "Ma'am, you must cease this at once," I shouted, stepping out onto my porch in my pajamas and work boots. Karen turned to face me, her eyes wild. "I possess HOA authority to eliminate non-compliant vegetation. At 3 in the morning, with a crew you've hired?" One of the landscapers appeared puzzled. "Ma'am, you informed us this was your property." "It is. I am the HOA president." The man looked back and forth between Karen and me, evidently grasping that he had been drawn into something unlawful. Wisely, he dropped his shovel and returned to his truck. Detective Williams showed up within 10 minutes, with Officer Martinez and another squad car right behind. The flashing lights transformed my front yard into a crime scene spectacle. "Mrs. Whitfield," Detective Williams stated, taking in the scene of destruction, "you are being arrested for criminal mischief and trespassing." But Karen was not finished. As she was being handcuffed, she yelled about her rights as an HOA board member and how I was ruining the neighborhood. The landscaping crew, in the meantime, was giving statements about how Karen had contracted them to clear unauthorized plantings from HOA land. This resulted in $3,000 worth of damage to plants that had been growing on my family's property since before Karen was even born. The following morning brought an even more frantic move. Karen, out on bail, seemed to have concluded that if she couldn't legally ruin my property, she would resort to sabotage. I noticed the diesel fuel spill when I tried to start my work truck. Someone had punctured the fuel tank during the night, and the distinct odor of diesel was spreading across my gravel driveway like a noxious sheen. Security footage showed a figure in dark attire around 2 a.m., but they had been cautious enough to conceal their face. Sarah Kim was irate when I contacted her. "Jake, this is moving beyond local disagreements." Karen is now facing felony charges. The truly significant breakthrough, however, came when Rick Donovan, the private investigator, called with an update from his financial inquiry. "Jake, Karen has been more active than we realized. I've identified 12 other neighborhoods where she executed similar ploys over the last 5 years. There are real estate license infractions in 3 different counties. She has been preying on elderly homeowners, specifically using her HOA roles to fabricate property crises that necessitate her real estate expertise." The strategy was horrifying. Karen would get on an HOA board, concoct emergencies about declining property values, coerce elderly residents into selling their homes quickly, and then take the commissions while also receiving kickbacks from developers. She had misappropriated an estimated $400,000 across various communities. "The FBI is assembling a federal case for interstate fraud," Rick added. Your neighborhood was merely her most recent target area. In the meantime, Karen's personal life was collapsing as dramatically as her criminal activities. Her husband, Bob, initiated divorce proceedings after learning about the financial offenses, taking their 2 children and relocating to his sister's house. Karen's adult son, Derek, came from California to address the matter, which seemed to involve threatening me outside the supermarket. "My mother is a decent person," Derek yelled, pointing his finger at my chest. "You are ruining her life with these falsehoods." I stepped back calmly. "Derek, your mother misappropriated over $100,000 from this community alone. That is not a falsehood. It's a fact of arithmetic. I don't care about your fabricated papers. She is my mother." It was at that moment that Officer Martinez coincidentally exited the supermarket. Derek's voice had been audible from the parking lot, and making public threats tends to draw police notice. "Sir, I will need you to move away from Mr. Morrison," Martinez stated, his hand casually placed on his radio. Derek made the error of escalating the situation. "This entire town is corrupt. You are all shielding this criminal." 3 minutes later, Derek was in handcuffs for menacing and disorderly conduct. The irony was not lost on me. Karen's own son had just been apprehended while trying to protect her reputation. That evening, Maria Santos called with information that perfected my day. Jake, Karen attempted to reach out to my news director to stop the investigative report. She offered him a $5,000 bribe to shift his focus to more significant stories. Karen had just added attempted bribery of a journalist to her expanding list of offenses. The woman was single-handedly digging her own grave. Maria, I said, I believe we are prepared for the final showdown. The courthouse meeting was set for 7 p.m. on a Thursday, but Karen showed up at 6:30 with the air of a general readying for a decisive conflict. From my truck, I observed her carrying boxes of evidence up the courthouse stairs, her heels striking the concrete like a metronome counting down to her own downfall. She had also brought support. Her husband, Bob, despite having filed for divorce, was by her side, appearing like a man at his own wake. Derek, recently released on bail, lingered by the courthouse entrance, making hostile motions at anyone who seemed to be on my side. The meeting room had a smell of industrial cleaner and anxious perspiration when I entered with Sarah Kim and Mrs. Chun. Karen had arranged a laptop and projector at the front, flanked by bankers' boxes marked evidence of harassment in her neat script. 47 homeowners were present, making it the most attended HOA meeting in the neighborhood's history. Maria Santos and her Channel 7 team were set up in the back corner, with cameras active. County Prosecutor Janet Stevens was seated in the first row, holding a briefcase that likely held Karen's fate. FBI agent Patricia Wong stood by the side wall, observing and taking notes. The atmosphere in the room was so thick you could slice it. Karen brought the meeting to order with unsteady hands, attempting to command the authority she had maintained for 8 years. Ladies and gentlemen, we are convened tonight to deal with the persistent harassment campaign directed at your elected HOA leadership. She advanced to her initial PowerPoint slide, which showed a picture of my property taken from a misleading perspective, making my vegetable patch look like a derelict plot. This individual has deliberately violated every community standard we have strived to uphold. I remained seated quietly in the front row, hands clasped, letting her deepen her own predicament. He has made threats against board members, disrupted community peace, and conducted illegal business operations on residential land. Her voice became increasingly shrill with every claim. Tonight, we are voting to initiate legal proceedings for his immediate eviction. It was then that Sarah Kim got to her feet. Mrs. Whitfield, may I present some pertinent financial records to the community? Karen's face turned ashen. This is not a Q&A session. Actually, stated Prosecutor Janet Stevens, as a matter of public concern, I believe the community ought to view these documents. Sarah linked her laptop to the projector. Displayed on the screen were HOA bank statements revealing Karen's unapproved fund transfers, fraudulent invoices for services not provided, and purchase documents for the Florida condominium acquired with community money. The room filled with gasps and irate murmurs. Mrs. Henderson from Maple Street exclaimed, "You purchased a vacation property with our funds?" Karen desperately clicked her remote, trying to regain command of the presentation. "These are falsified documents. This man has been harassing me for months." "Mrs. Whitfield," Sarah said calmly, "these records are directly from your bank. Would you care to clarify this $43,000 transfer to Meadowbrook Maintenance LLC, an entity that does not exist?" At that point, Karen completely lost her composure. "Lies," she yelled, moving towards the projector. "All of you are plotting against me. This is my neighborhood. I established this community." Bob Whitfield stood up and exited the room. Their marriage had effectively ended in front of 47 onlookers and a television news team. Derek moved quickly toward the front. "Do not dare to attack my mother." Courthouse security intervened before Derek could get to Sarah, but the harm had been done. Karen's family was breaking apart in real time, on camera, before the entire community. "Mrs. Whitfield," Prosecutor Stevens declared, rising with her briefcase, "I possess warrants for your arrest on charges of aggravated theft, elder abuse, and interstate fraud." The room became completely silent, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the whir of the TV cameras. Maria Santos delivered the ultimate revelation. "Ladies and gentlemen, Channel 7's inquiry has found that Miss Whitfield conducted similar schemes in 12 other communities across 3 states. The FBI projects the total amount stolen to be over $400,000. Karen collapsed into her chair as if all the air had been let out of her. This cannot be real. I am the president. I am the one in control here. It was then that I finally rose. Karen, you were never in control of me. And based on state corporate filings, you have not been legally in control of this HOA since 2022. I turned to the room. The entity that has been levying your fees and creating your regulations lost its legal standing 3 years ago. Every fee you have remitted since then was acquired under false pretenses. The community erupted in a chorus of angry voices demanding reimbursement, answers, and justice. Karen remained at the front table, gazing at her laptop screen as if it might offer an escape. Detective Williams emerged at the rear of the room, holding handcuffs. Karen Whitfield, you are under arrest for aggravated theft, corporate fraud, and elder abuse. As Karen was escorted out in handcuffs, she glanced back at me with unadulterated loathing. This is not finished, Jake Morrison. I stood up calmly and stated the words I had been holding back for months. Actually, Karen, it is. You overlooked one crucial fact when you chose to tangle with me. I displayed Grandpa's original land deed. I don't just reside here. I own here. The expression on her face was worth every moment of lost sleep she had inflicted upon me. The narrative spread through social media like wildfire. In less than 24 hours, the courthouse footage from Channel 7 had amassed 2.3 million views. Karen's booking photo quickly became an internet sensation, trending under hashtags like #PeakKaren and #JusticeServed. My phone was inundated with requests for interviews, but the deepest sense of fulfillment came from observing the events unfold precisely as we had orchestrated. Karen's arraignment attracted a gathering of more than 200 individuals, victims from 12 different communities spanning 3 states. The courthouse steps resembled a peculiar homeowners association gathering, with the distinction that everyone was present to see their previous oppressor face legal consequences. Judge Patricia Hoffman established bail at $500,000. Karen, dressed in an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her typical color-coordinated attire, was unable to post it. All of her finances had been seized in anticipation of asset forfeiture actions. Your Honor, announced Prosecutor Janet Stevens, the state is bringing federal charges for wire fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering conspiracy. We are recommending a sentence of 15 to 20 years, given the extent of the victimization and the intentional targeting of elderly individuals. Derek had already accepted a plea bargain for reduced charges in return for his testimony against his mother. The young man had finally understood that defending Karen's reputation was not worth sacrificing his own future. The true spectacle, however, occurred outside the courthouse. Maria Santos had arranged for investigative journalists from 3 major networks to be present. ABC, NBC, and CNN were all eager for the story of the HOA president who overstepped her authority and lost everything. The courthouse steps transformed into a media frenzy that would have made Karen proud under different circumstances. Jake Morrison, said Rebecca Chin from ABC News, you have emerged as a national symbol for HOA reform. How does it feel to know your experience is motivating new laws in 6 states? I stood on those courthouse steps, with Sarah Kim and Mrs. Chun at my sides, facing a crowd of journalists and thankful neighbors. The autumn air was filled with the sense of justice and new beginnings. This was never about personal vengeance, I stated, looking straight at the cameras. This was about shielding a community from someone who had forgotten that authority is coupled with responsibility, not just entitlement. The crowd broke into applause. A voice from the back yelled, "Inform them about the land rights." I held up Grandpa's original deed, the very document that had set this whole series of events in motion. My grandfather was a very wise man. When he sold the development rights in 1989, he put in a provision to protect the community from this exact type of corruption. Sometimes, the law does safeguard good people, but only if they have the courage to stand up and use it. It's a key legal point that sunshine laws mandate HOA financial openness, and whistleblower protection laws prohibit retaliation against residents who report fraudulent activities. The takeaway is that recording meetings and insisting on open records are your most effective tools against corruption, and they are entirely legal. Maria Santos came forward with her microphone. What is your message to other communities facing HOA abuses? Verify your HOA's legal standing with the state corporate registry. Insist on seeing financial documents. Record every meeting. And always remember, bullies only possess the power you grant them. At that moment, Karen was brought out for her perp walk. Detective Williams led her through the crowd in handcuffs, past a multitude of cameras and hundreds of her past victims. She kept her gaze lowered, but I could see her searching the crowd for anyone supportive. There were none. An elderly man from the Cherry Grove neighborhood called out, "Karen, do you recall me? You misappropriated my grandson's college savings." Another voice added, "She used our roof repair funds for her vacation." The crowd's anger was tangible, yet it was restrained. These were not individuals looking for revenge. They were citizens witnessing justice finally being carried out. As Karen got to the transport vehicle, she looked back at me one last time. The animosity in her eyes had been superseded by something worse, the dawning comprehension that she had ruined everything for no reason. "Jake Morrison," she called out, her voice barely carrying over the noise of the crowd. "You may believe you have prevailed, but you have ruined more than just me." I moved closer so she could hear my reply distinctly. "Karen, I didn't ruin anything. I merely prevented you from ruining others." The transport doors shut with a metallic sound that marked the end of an era. Journalist after journalist sought comments. But the most meaningful exchange occurred with Mrs. Chun as we returned to my truck. "Jake," she said, placing her weathered hand on my arm, "your grandfather would be so proud. You utilized his gift not only to safeguard yourself, but to safeguard all of us." The journey home took us through the neighborhood that Karen had subjected to her rule for 8 years. Children were playing in their yards without the threat of violation citations. Neighbors were chatting across fences without fear of being reported. The for sale signs that had appeared during the conflict were being taken down as families chose to remain. Sometimes, confronting one bully can shield thousands from future harm. As we arrived in my driveway, I noticed lights on in homes all over Meadowbrook Estates. These were not the anxious lights of people fearful of their HOA president, but the inviting lights of a community that was at last able to be itself. Karen's oppressive rule had ended. Now, the genuine work of rebuilding could start. 6 months have passed, and I am seated on my front porch, enjoying the most beautiful sunset Meadowbrook Estates has experienced in a long time. The fragrance of freshly baked bread wafts from Mrs. Chin's kitchen, blending with the aroma of ripening tomatoes from our shared community garden. Life has a remarkable ability to recover once the source of toxicity is gone. Grandpa's 1987 Chevy is purring in the driveway, completely restored and performing better than it did when it first left the factory. I take it to work each morning, with the windows down, listening to his favorite country tunes on the radio. At times, I can almost sense him beside me, pleased with how his grandson finally stood up for what is important. The neighborhood association we established to succeed Karen's HOA functions on a straightforward idea. Voluntary partnership is always superior to enforced rules. Property values have surprisingly risen by 12% since we dismantled the authoritarian system. It seems people are willing to pay a premium to reside in a place where they feel a sense of freedom. My small engine repair venture has flourished beyond my wildest dreams. News got around that the person who dismantled the corrupt HOA also repairs lawnmowers, chainsaws, and generators with fair pricing and dependable service. I have brought on 2 part-time workers, one of whom is Bob Henderson's son, Tommy, who was looking for a job after finishing trade school. The Red Barn has evolved into the social hub of our community. We hold monthly potluck dinners that bring neighbors together to enjoy food, share stories, and cultivate the kind of authentic friendships that HOA regulations could never create. Last month, we had 83 guests for Mrs. Chin's 84th birthday celebration. The sound of joyful laughter filling that old wooden structure would have surely made Grandpa proud. Sarah Kim and I were married in that very barn on a clear October morning, precisely 1 year after Karen's arrest. Mrs. Chun was the officiant. She had become ordained online for this specific event, chuckling with glee as she declared us husband and wife, under the authority of love, not lawyers. Karen is currently serving a 12-year federal sentence in a low-security prison in West Virginia. Her cellmate, ironically, is another HOA embezzler from Nevada who operated a similar scheme. Derek visits her from time to time, but their bond is still tense. Some connections, once severed, cannot be mended. The effects of our story are still spreading. The Ohio legislature has enacted the HOA Transparency Act, which mandates yearly independent financial reviews and public access to financial records. 47 similar inquiries have been initiated across the country, resulting in the recovery of over $2.3 million in fraudulent charges and the imprisonment of 6 more corrupt board members. I gave testimony to a congressional subcommittee on housing, sharing my grandfather's story and outlining how regular people can defend themselves against institutional overreach. It's a key legal point that sunshine laws, which require public meetings and open records, are now the norm in 34 states. The ultimate takeaway is that the most effective safeguard against corruption is a well-informed community that insists on transparency. The community garden on my property yields enough produce to keep our local food pantry stocked throughout the year. We have created the Morrison Family Scholarship Fund, which helps young people attend trade schools and community colleges. This year's scholarship was awarded to Maria Santos Jr., who intends to major in journalism. Inspired by her mother's investigative reporting that was instrumental in bringing Karen to justice. Mrs. Chun manages our Elder Protection Network, educating seniors on how to identify financial scams and abuses of property rights. She has successfully thwarted 3 potential HOA fraud attempts in nearby communities, which has earned her the title the HOA Whisperer from appreciative residents. The documentary Deed Restrictions and Democracy was shown at the Sundance Film Festival, where it received the Audience Choice Award for Best Investigative Feature. Maria Santos used the award money to establish a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping communities combat HOA corruption. The most gratifying experience, however, was receiving a letter last week from a widow in Phoenix. Her neighborhood had been targeted by Karen 3 years prior, with elderly residents being coerced into selling their homes for less than their market value. After learning about our experience, the community launched their own investigation into their HOA, uncovered similar fraudulent activities, and successfully brought their board president to justice. "Your grandfather's foresight saved our neighborhood as well," she wrote. "Thank you for demonstrating that a single individual, armed with truth and the law, can overcome any oppressor." As the sun descends behind the old barn, I can see children playing in the yards all over Meadowbrook Estates. There are no violation notices, no dread of arbitrary regulations, and no tyrannical HOA president observing from behind her curtains. There are only neighbors being neighbors,